The utilization again continues to remain low and will continue to remain low till 2017. We'll see utilization numbers of around 80 to 85, maybe 90% going in 2020. Important to see here is the base case we are seeing 5 to 6%, high case could go to 7%. That was on steel. Coming to key trends in global zinc sector. See, Andrew covered a lot for us in terms of supply, demand, and pricing. I will particularly cover the key three emerging trends that we are seeing in global zinc market today. The first one is emerging markets like China and India will continue to lead demand patterns. The emerging middle class and urbanization is going to help create more demand. The second key trend is the geological inflation in the mines. And this is something which is as of today is much under-researched. But across all minerals over the last couple of years, and particularly going forward, we are going to see geological inflation, which means the structural cost of mines are going to go up. We are already seeing this work in the coal market over the last 2 or 3 years, where your angle of dips have gone down, costs have risen by over 200%. And same will happen with all commodities. Zinc is no exception to that. But what interestingly happens for zinc mines is your cost curve will flatten. So the best cost producer to the even third quartile cost producer, the difference will come down, which means your third quartile mines will also become profitable and attractive going forward. The third important trend particularly is recycling and secondary markets are going to provide more opportunities, and I think Stephen talked about them as well. Recycled material could provide an important role to balance this demand-supply gap as we go forward. However, till 2020, it still will be a much smaller portion. To the first theme of the increased demand that we continue, we've just taken an example of China, showing that the China steel demand continues to increase, and therefore so will the galvanized product. Interesting to note is the share of galvanized product for China is about 19% now of the flat steel demand, which I think is quite interesting and impressive. The geological inflation point I was saying, the ore grades particularly going down, the zinc quality and the silver, gold quality going down further. Sharp drop is what we expect, particularly in the zinc quality. As we go down, the mines get deeper, the angles of dip increase. This is going to be an important trend to watch out for. The TCs will remain low. If you see here particularly, the concentrate demand is at about 16.6, whereas if we look at the supply from the base case, adding the probable as well as possible projects, will hardly reach to 16. This is the story on the mining side, whereas on the smelting side, what we see is while the demand is about close to 15.7, the supply could be as high as 18 to 19, which is quite interesting. What it means is, I go back to what I was talking earlier, the curve by cost of the first decile. And that's the ratio which we are showing. We used to have in about 2011 a ratio of 11, which could fall down to 3.5 on the mining side, and from 2.4, 2.2 in the smelting side. What it particularly means is the cost curves are flattening out. And a typical cost curve which we see, that ratio, a healthy ratio of 8 to 10 is what we see generally in commodities, is going to fall down to 3.5 to 2.2, which therefore the differentiation becomes a question mark. And therefore the question is, what really happens to the differentiation, right? The other key trend, the third trend that I was talking about was about recycling. About 30% of zinc production is coming from recycled ore. However, I think going forward, this is going to only keep increasing. What is important to note here is that half of this recycled zinc is generated during processing itself, and there's an opportunity here for the smelters also to look at newer technologies to make improvements here. Coming to galvanizing, Important to note, we talked about our substitutes of aluminium and stainless steel. There's a structural advantage of at least 2.5 to 2x between galvanized products, which is the zinc, and the substitutes, which are aluminium and stainless steel. Of course, there are differences in consumption, say about 600 kg of aluminium substitutes for a ton of steel, for example, in automobile, but you still end up having 1.5 to 2x advantage purely on the prices that we have seen. An interesting analysis is, particularly emerging markets like India, more than aluminium and stainless steel, it's the epoxy and the other substitutes which basically, compete with galvanized steel. But over a project life cycle, if we look at, the whole change, what we actually see is galvanized products, the TCO, or the total life cycle cost, is way, way better than any other substitutes that we have available. And I think this is the important point that needs to be, sold to make sure that the penetration of galvanized steel actually goes up in India. Across the globe, we have looked at developed countries and India. If you see the percentage penetration of total steel consumption on the galvanized steel in India is at around 6%, whereas in developed countries, like say for example Germany, it's about 20%, and the rest of the countries around 15 to 20%. So we are at a much lower penetration rate today, and I think this is where the whole thrust and focus has to go going forward. As I think Stephen was mentioning, whatever he sees around in Brussels is all galvanized, whereas in India we don't really have that right sorts of penetration. However, the story on galvanizing is not all that depressing. If you look at how India has done, we have actually grown at about 11% over the last 15 to 20 years. The biggest sector, of course, is construction, which is about 40-45%, followed by automobile. However, our share, as the earlier slide also showed, is at 6 to 7%. The share of total steel consumption, in India is still at 6 to 7%, which is structurally low. Going forward, we expect the demand of galvanized steel to increase primarily on two premises, a robust construction growth and a robust automotive growth, and therefore the penetration which needs to go up. For the next 4 years, about $100 to $120 billion is what is expected to be invested in India for infrastructure. Particularly now that the new and stable government is in place, we can expect the base case to probably improve better than what we are forecasting presently. And also with this new government, you will have openness to FDI and other investment, which will help increase this momentum. On the automotive side, I think which I think all of us know, it's a known fact that in India, automotive sector is going to grow and at a fast pace, primarily driven through the urbanization and increase of the middle class population wanting for more automotive vehicles. I'll quickly take you through this. This is more detail around how the construction infrastructure sector will grow. Project sizes are going to get bigger. India today is at a cusp of where we can take off on infrastructure, and that's going to be also the bottleneck going forward. Therefore, we need to make sure that infrastructure grows at a high rate. Automotive, as well as the household incomes will increase, will see a healthy growth of 9 to 10%, and importantly across all the segments of tractors, commercial vehicles, two-wheelers, and so on. So healthy growth across all the sections. This makes us believe that therefore there is an important and an interesting opportunity here for galvanized steel to also make roadways into India. Taking a step back to looking at what are also the trends emerging in galvanizing, what is happening in galvanizing, and Mr. Venugopalan in his presentation did refer to a few of these. Particularly on the product trends, we have seen galvalume, ZAM, manganese, etc. coming in more and more into use, primarily because they give us better adhesion properties, and which means the high strength steel, when you try to coat the stamping, it makes it much more easier. And of course, it gives you the better anti-corrosive properties. In the market particularly, more and more hot rolled steel construction and structural steel primarily is now moving to galvanized steel. There has been a hypothesis where we said, particularly the marine applications, where a lot of corrosion occurs, and primarily due to the chlorine content. Galvanizing could be an initial option to start with. May not be the best option in the long term, but a good option to start with. On the technologies trends, we are moving towards electrolytic galvanizing. There is a automation a move, particularly the physical vapor deposition. Not as much in India, but globally. And what is interesting, what I was referring to earlier, particularly on smelting side, where you could increase your zinc recovery through zinc dross, skimming, and so on, which is also quite interesting. What is important is the key initiatives, and we want to put a target of saying, can penetration in India increase to 10%? The galvanized steel penetration, can we increase it to 10%? And what are the 3-4 key areas that we need to look at? Presently, at the end use state, India doesn't really have the right set of standards. And then that is something we can look at, both from the point of view of environment as well as from the point of view of quality. Just like steel has, right? I mean, we don't necessarily have for the galvanized products. What is also important is there is an urgent need to promote usage of galvanized products in the end sectors. We have a tendency, the Indian end users have a tendency to just look at the immediate cost rather than looking at the project life cycle or the TCO, what we call as. It's important to bring that education through sustained efforts and the mindset change that therefore needs to happen. Also, interestingly, I think there are new avenues, and I'm sure a lot of you will talk about in the conference going forward on architectural railways, tunnels, bridges, where galvanized steel can be used, mining equipment, like Stephen talked about, particularly in underground mines. I think a major push there also is necessary. Finally, I think the mindset change is going to be critical in India to make this 10% penetration happen. Steel has 10 to 12 years, and this whole life cycle, project life cycle costing is going to be very, very critical. Having said all of this, and this increase of penetration, we still need to realize that it's going to take time, and therefore, in the next couple of years, it's going to be important that the galvanizers operationally become much more efficient, particularly on the power consumption and the recovery. As you are competing, as you are trying to educate the consumers, you need to become efficient at your end to make sure that the competition is much more robust. I think I'll stop at that. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now with this, we open the floor for question and answer session. If you have any question for any of our speakers, please raise your hand. You're requested to state your name, your organization, designation, and address the question to our speakers. Volunteers, would you please come forward so that we can pass on the mic?
I think we are doing very well on time, I guess. Isn't it?
So yes, the floor is open for question and answer session. Let's hear it from you all. If you have a question, please raise your hand and our volunteers shall come across to you. Yeah, there's a question.
Thank you very much. A question for Dr. Venugopalan. We know that the use of the higher strength steels in the automobiles is driven by regulations in many cases, the requirement for improved fuel economy and reduced emissions. We certainly see those regulations becoming much more strict in the European Union and in North America. And I was wondering, are there similar pressures in the in India to reduce emissions and improve fuel economy? Are they following the trends of other countries? Is that a pressure to make lighter weight vehicles in India as well?
See, till recently, India has been using only low strength steels. But now, the designs that most of the auto manufacturers have are global. So they produce a global quality car, so they get a chance even to export from India. So this is the main driver. It is because of the market competition. That's what I would say. And unless the steel producers in the country come out with the high-strength steels, it looks like the development or the new designs will not incorporate the use of high-strength steels. But now quite a few steel producers in the country have good facilities. They've started producing steels with higher strength. In the last few years, I would say that the Indian steel industry has developed quite a few new grades. So this has triggered the use of high-strength steels. I wouldn't say that it is because of regulations. It is because of the competition. But even today, the coated steel use is quite limited, as has been shown by many other speakers. And in the automotive, the highest strength steel coated probably is only 440 grade. They have not gone beyond that. When the steel producers have facilities which can produce high-strength coated steel, I'm sure that even the market would grow. From the Tata Steel side, I would say that our next facility, which is being done in Orissa, we are coming up with a very big steel facility in Orissa. That will have all modern facilities which can produce high-strength steels, both coated and uncoated.
Yeah, we have a question.
This is a question to Andrew Thomas. I'm very interested whether there is some congruence between Wood Mackenzie and what McKinsey has said about the flattening of the cost curve for mines and smelters. And very interested to hear what Wood Mackenzie thinks about the role that secondary zinc plays in that flattening.
Thank you. Well, currently, secondary zinc has played a fairly minor role in the zinc market, but we expect it to grow in the future. But in terms of the cost curve, I think the big factor in flattening the cost curve has not been so much related to zinc, but the fact that there are very few what we would call true zinc mines out there these days. Zinc is frequently mined with other metals, copper, gold, silver, lead. And because the prices of these metals are so high, in some places you can bring zinc out of the ground for free. So I think that's probably the main influence on the flattening of the curve. Now obviously, this makes zinc mining relatively insensitive to the zinc price going forward, but it also increases its risk, because if the copper price, for example, were to fall, which we are forecasting, it could suddenly transform zinc mining from being a comfortable industry where everyone's making money to one where quite a big chunk is struggling. So you don't have to just watch the zinc price these days, you've got to watch the price of all these other metals.
Okay. To Dr. Velunugopal, is Tata Steel going for zinc, aluminum, magnesium system of coating, or someone else in India is also going for this system?
See, the zinc aluminum magnesium coatings give excellent corrosion life. And I'm aware that this coating has been already tried quite successfully in construction sector, even in India. And as far as its use in automotive is concerned, at least the demand has not grown in this country. Only in Japan probably it has been successful. And within the group, say we have Tata Steel Europe, and they have some zinc magnesium coating already, and then they have got regular production going on there. And to create this, to have a product which is different from what others do, probably would do it, but our next line, which I talked about, that's going to come up in Kalinganagar, probably that will come only around 2018 or 2019. Okay, so we have to think about what the market is at that time. But it's possible to do that. We have this in mind, since another 5-6 years are still there. So we are not, having a definite plan, but it can be done.
In this conference over the 2 days, but one of the things I've noticed is that the Wood Mackenzies and the McKinseys of this world, they combine all the information about galvanizing in one slice of a pie chart. As a sheet steel person all my life, I'd like to see that separated into general galvanizing and sheet galvanizing, because one's a flat roll product and one's a shape product. So I'm wondering, to avoid confusion, certainly in my mind, but also I think to the public at large, because it tends to reduce the amount of zinc or used in galvanizing if you look at it as a total picture. But there is a much higher concentration of galvanized steel in flat roll. So my suggestion is that you go back and you try and see if it can be separated, because it's two totally different markets. I have another question, but I'll wait for your answer.
The top-down approach typically is the overall thing. But yes, when you get into the details, you need to look at what's the percentage, particularly in the flat side. So for example, as we said, in China, it's about 19%. In India, right now, it's about 10% in the flat category. But yeah, I think I like that, what you say.
And certainly when I'm modeling my country-by-country analysis, I do split the continuous and post-fabrication galvanizing. It's just, I suppose, historic precedent that we tend to lump it back together again when it comes to presenting it. So I'll take your suggestion on board.
Well, thank you. Just another question. As Steve mentioned, Brussels has a really high application rate of zinc in just about every facet of life, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's building construction, whether it's appliances, and so on. In Canada, we have a similar high, penetration of zinc, but one particular one that I really think has a great future in India is water management. In Canada, there's a 70,000 ton a year market for heavy zinc-coated pipes for water management. We call them culverts, but basically spiral wound, roll formed steel pipe with about 600 grams per square meter on each total both sides. So it's a high end use, high value for the steel companies, as I can attest to. We sold all of that product at book price or higher. So it was really, it's a profitable product that steel companies can make quite effectively. It's easy to roll form. And I would like to see this whole, how best to change the mindset of water management in India from concrete pipes, which are heavy to transport, much higher cost, especially at larger diameters, and have that replaced by steel, which is a lighter, more recyclable, and effective manager of water. So your comments on that?
Yeah, I also agree with you. People should go for more steel pipes, and for water, people use even cast iron pipes in India. I won't say that all people use only concrete pipes. The problem, I think, is one of pilferage, most probably. When you go for metallic pipes, I think they get stolen. That could be a reason why people go for concrete pipes. That's what I guess.
I think the question comes back to how
It gets stolen. That's the reason why I think people go for something which cannot be stolen. That's what it is.
Mumbai. I have two questions to the analysts from Wood Mackenzie. My first question is that in the last decade and a half, when China entered into the metal space, the nearly 80 to 90% of the incremental demand of zinc has been created in China. In your graph, the demand going forward, you've seen a consistent rise in zinc consumption. As China is now moving from an investment-based model to a consumption-based model, where do you think the new China would really come from in the next 10 years, and whether the pace of demand would continue to be as we have seen in the last 1 decade? That's my first question.
Well, to be honest, I don't think I'm forecasting that it's going to effectively halve in year-on-year growth terms over the next 5 to 10 years. We're starting from a much higher base. So even though growth rates are halving, Chinese zinc consumption is still going to grow by the best part of 400,000 tons a year for the next 5 to 10 years. So I don't think there is another China out there at the moment. We're going to be primarily focused on China for the next 10 to 15 years as the big driver of zinc consumption.
My next question is about a point that you touched upon in your presentation, is about substitution. We've seen in the past that to some extent some of the base metals are substitutable one versus the other, and especially when the price of one metal goes exorbitantly high as compared to the other, we see those substitutions keep happening. We've seen this in copper in 2006, when the prices went to $9,000, aluminum was much lower. A lot of AC pipes got replaced from copper to aluminum. And in fact, even today, when the price ratios have come down, yet those replacements have continued. So those substitutions became permanent. With zinc prices, you're forecasting going much higher towards $4,000. I don't know what happens to aluminum prices. Do you think substitution becomes a very big risk to this industry?
I think it is a risk, but it's going to take time to happen. When we had prices spike back in 2006 and 2007, we didn't see much in the way of substitution. The big hit for zinc came through the brass sector, which was being driven by copper, not the zinc price. The new generations of coating alloys, I think, are going to help because they're going to reduce the zinc coating thickness, but we're still going to be consuming quite a lot of zinc that way. I suppose the biggest risk is for die casting. I think as you see high prices, it's just going to exaggerate the trend that we've seen for the last 15, 20 years, and you're going to see less and less zinc die casting alloys produced. But for most of the other uses, it's a risk, but it's not a huge one. It will really depend on how long prices are held at that peak of around $4,000 a ton. If that goes on for 3 or 4 years, then it becomes an issue. If it's for, as we expect, a couple of years, it's not such a big deal.
Myself is Ajay Sahni from Bhushan Power and Steel. My question to Dr. Venugopal, can we have the applications for this zinc, aluminum, magnesium alloy sheet? What will the applications?
Can I have the question again, please?
The applications for this coated material of zinc, aluminum and magnesium. The application and the usage, the benefits what people can be derived out of it.
See, one thing which has been now seen in the construction sector, when you go for the zinc, magnesium, aluminum, the corrosion life is almost 3.5 times the normal zinc aluminum system. And the zinc magnesium coating is hard. It's not as flexible as an automotive company would like to have. So now, this coating has been commercialized in the construction segment. The life is much higher. And so you can use it for even roofing cladding. Okay? You can afford to even reduce the thickness of coating and still, you have a lower cost and you give a good value to your end user.
No, how it will be different from aluminum zinc coating and zinc magnesium coating? That the lifespan will be 3.5 times more?
Say zinc aluminum coating, okay, of course, it has a very wide range of aluminum, okay. What we call as zinc aluminum coating, which is extensively used in the country, is zinc aluminum 0.2, okay. Zinc 0.2% aluminum. So you compare this with your zinc magnesium aluminum coating. If you choose the right composition, it's very bright, absolutely bright. And then the life is much higher. And I also mentioned in my presentation that it could be used for automotive. In automotive, I'm sure that when it is developed well, it may even replace GA. The powdering of this particular coating is far, far lower. Okay? In GA, the powdering is much higher, number one. And then when you compare the electrode life of this particular coating is much higher.
And how about in construction sector, sir?
What is it?
In construction sectors for roofing and cladding?
It can be done. That's what I say. It can be done. So you have to promote it.
And over and above, you can have a coated on it. The organic coating on it can be done over it.
What is it?
This color coating can be done over it.
Yeah, yeah.